Get this. The IRS told Congress that there's nothing to see here when it comes to targeting Tea Party groups. I mean, literally, nothing to see because, well, the agency now claims to have lost 2 years of former IRS official Lois Lerner's emails, and not just any 2 random years either, but the crucial years, the ones we care about, from 2009 to 2011, which is when the targeting of Tea Party groups was taking place. Oh, how convenient. So basically, the IRS is giving us the dog ate my homework story, right? Now, according to a letter the IRS sent to the House Ways and Means Committee, which is investigating the scandal, a computer crash took place in the summer of 2011 and wiped out all of her prior emails. All right, so let me get this straight. The IRS processes hundreds of millions of tax returns every year and maintains all those records of every single dollar you owe, but manages to lose only Lois Lerner's emails, the person at the center of the investigation. Do you really expect us to believe that? Especially since the IRS manual, Chapter 10, Section 3 says, quote, the Treasury Department's current email policy requires emails and attachments that meet the definition of a federal record to be added to the organization's files by printing them, including the essential transmission data, and filing them with related paper records. Quote, so there should still be a hard copy of the transactions. That is, unless Lerner was trying to hide something or her dog ate those too. Joining me now with more on this is Jordan Sekulow, Executive Director of the American Center for Law and Justice. I'm sorry. They just came up with this computer crash thing now?
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem, Andrew, is that, this would be something you would immediately notify congressional investigators about. And, a year ago would have known pretty quickly if there was this huge gap. And so what the IRS is saying is that they were going back and going to interagency, so only inside the IRS, looking for other people who had this correspondence. But what they're admitting to is that any emails she sent to the White House without someone from the IRS on it, any emails she sent to someone at the Treasury Department or a Democrat member of Congress or their staff or anyone outside of the IRS, that they can't have access to those, that somehow those emails only were crashed and there's no way for them to recover them. And of course, it's one of those classic situations where they'll say, you asked us for the emails, but you didn't ask the Department of Justice, you didn't ask the White House. So that's one line about, one way of getting to the emails. And the other part about this is this finally the White House actually throwing Lois Lerner, in a sense, under the bus? Because now there's no evidence that points to anyone else. It makes it the Lois Lerner, tries to make it the Lois Lerner scandal.
What about the hard copies? Are there hard copies?
Well, the IRS, I mean, they buried this away. That was what was also interesting, is that this was on the 7th page of a 15-page memo to 2 senators that the Ways and Means gets notified about on Friday evening, typical, in the middle of all the different news stories going on with Iraq and everything else. And so are there hard copies? There are rules about that. You read that, and that's true. Was the IRS complying with it? What extent did they go to actually? They say that they had people look at their servers, but the way they're explaining this right now, that somehow it was only Lois Lerner's computer that's caused a crash that was also removed, and that the server has been redone since 2011, so they don't have the tape. But every data expert that I've seen, and of course we're looking at this even more so now, has said that this just doesn't seem true. I mean, we still have this belief
Jordan, why don't we just ask the NSA?
We can get to these emails.
Why don't we just ask the NSA, right? The NSA should have every email she's ever sent, according to the NSA.
Yeah, I mean, it's absurd. This is an absurd stalling tactic. It's stonewalling an investigation. The IRS has done a lot of this, a lot of stonewalling, but this is about the most egregious. I mean, a year later, suddenly you need to notify Congress that you can't access this. They don't say, by the way, and that's important, you point out the NSA, that they tried any other means to get at this other than asking people at the IRS basically to forward their emails with lowest learner. You know, it's typical. The IRS holds other people, you know, the public, to such a high standard, and businesses, obviously, that if you don't comply, I mean, Barclays got hit with a $3.7 million fine for not keeping their data correctly, electronic data correctly, and yet the IRS is saying they can't go back a few years. And as you pointed out, these are the years. All of our 41 clients, this is when they applied. These were the delays. This is when the pressure was the highest. I mean, this is the key critical moment where, and the time period that Lois Lerner and other IRS officials were saying that they didn't know what was happening. And so suddenly all of that disappears.
So we're never going to know who she might have been coordinating with outside of the IRS, because obviously you can see who she was emailing or CCing inside the IRS. But if she was talking to the Federal Election Commission, her old stomping grounds, talking to people in the Democratic Party, the White House,
yep.
Unless we know who those people are to subpoena their emails, all gone.
Right. It becomes really broad, you know, so it becomes one of those situations. And this is what we've thought about, you know, from the legal strategy. Is this ultimately, because in a civil case, kind of like when you take the Fifth, and how in a civil case that doesn't protect you from being held liable for actions that someone is alleging that you took place in. Here's a situation where if the government really wants to stonewall, and so the other agencies say they can't find them, or you know, it's too big or too broad of a task to try and do this and track this down, what a judge could say, and in our case that's possible, well, then everything they're alleging is true. But it takes us back to this idea that then it will be Lois Lerner who was the heart of the scandal. But you know, it reeks of exactly what we've seen in Washington in the past, is that what do? You try to cover up who else was involved. And, you know, for anybody out there who thinks, you know, you got to be a conspiracy theorist, one, to think that, you know, the IRS was doing this to people, then we found out they are, and then two, that all the emails disappear from Lois Lerner to the outside world, and including even inside the Treasury Department. If you didn't have IRS in your email address, supposedly those have all disappeared.
Okay, great. So good luck chasing that down, Jordan. Thank you so much for coming on the program tonight.